Welcome to the Wheel of Time Diaries, where this episode is just a couple of days late on account of a recent trip that I just took to North Carolina, and the fact that I didn't end up reading at all while I was gone. I was expecting that I would get a little bit read, and then I would be able to catch up on the rest like Wednesday morning and, record this video to actually have it out on time on Thursday like normally I have these videos out, and that wasn't quite the case. I didn't get any reading done, and I also didn't read on Wednesday. So at the time that I'm recording this on Friday, I actually just went through the, 6 chapters that I read for this week's reading. Not very much of it, just so that I could get this video out, as soon as possible, which, as the case is for now, is seeming to be Saturday instead of the normal Thursday. That is just the way things go sometimes. But as I said, I covered about 6 chapters in my reading for Knife of Dreams just to get through the next storyline, basically, before we get into another section of the book. I am just about halfway through at this point. Spent a little over 4 hours reading over the last 2 days. Again, not very much was read for this week's diary, but it does put my total reading for Knife of Dreams at this point at about 17 and a half hours at the halfway point, which is quite a bit. And I gotta say, for spoiler-free impressions, to kind of just start off with all of that, I'm thinking today's diary will actually be pretty short on account of less content, and they're not really being that much to talk about in the content in the first place. This week's reading, the main storyline that we're going to cover, is a little bit similar to the storyline that we covered in last week's diary. Last week we talked about some of the stuff that was going on with Matt and his storyline over there, where there were a couple of bigger reveal type of moments, things that felt pretty impactful, little moments that felt impactful, but where the broader storyline in and of itself just kind of didn't really click for me, in the sense that I felt like a lot of it was drawn out a good bit. Matt's storyline was definitely a little bit longer than I would have preferred in that POV section. It, went into more detail of random stuff that I don't think really mattered. And this week, it's not Matt's storyline anymore. Most of what we're talking about this week, and for the record, I suppose I should mention this week we're talking about chapters 12 through 17. Chapter 12 is another Perrin chapter, and we'll get there in just a moment, obviously. That'll be the first thing we talk about. But the rest of the reading this week, chapters 13 through 17, was all Elaine POV stuff, and kind of similar to the Matt POV stuff that we covered last week. It was kind of variable in terms of how much I was enjoying it, where it was just kind of dragging a little bit, taking a little bit too long to do what it's doing, where there were, I guess a couple of bigger reveal moments, not anything super massive or mind-shattering, but where you can tell that what this book is doing with these storylines is trying to set up for another arc again, which is not a problem. I typically enjoy that kind of thing, and historically I've enjoyed that thing as far as Robert Jordan has been concerned in the past as well. Kind of as a rule, particularly I guess in the first half of the series. The last handful of books have been a little bit less good on that front, I would say, just kind of working off a rough memory here. But the Elaine storyline was, again, just a case where there's, a couple of moments where it's okay, this is worth noting, this thing happened, but basically everything else just doesn't feel super impactful or worth talking about or worth even really mentioning in the grand scheme of the series. So, like I said, this week's diary is probably all in all going to be pretty short because there's really not much to talk about from this week's reading, and I also just didn't end up reading that much for this week's diary in the first place anyway. So I guess with that being said, the reading was kind of fine, not great, just not bad. It's just kind of whatever. It is what it is at this point. I think I've gotten to be a little bit exhausted with the pacing of Robert Jordan's writing and how he actually structures these things. These 5 books, I guess, from A Crown of Swords all the way up through now. Even the back half of Lord of Chaos have just been, there's always been some problem structurally with one of the books to a degree that's just okay, I'm not sure we need to spend this much time doing some of these things, where I think that if Robert Jordan were to have outlined a lot more of this stuff, you'd have a much more succinct and just generally enjoyable story, because it would actually be going through its pacing a little bit better, and also probably wouldn't have 15 trillion characters who are not worth remembering their names of, but that's a completely different complaint. Let's move into the spoilers and actually talk about some of the things that went down. Like I mentioned, chapter 12 is going to be where we start for this diary, continuing Perrin's storyline from a couple chapters that occurred that we talked about last week. I don't fully remember everything that happened last week, but I'm pretty sure basically the gist of it was Perrin and co. meeting up with a banner general of the Shanshan, basically agreeing to get Forkroot and some other stuff based off of Suroth's orders, and using that to plan an assault on the Shido Aiel, who of course are holding Zareen and some of the other prisoners and stuff that Perrin is trying to get. Chapter 12 essentially just continues that and doesn't really do much more with it. You're just getting another step in that process complete. Thankfully, Perrin at the start of the chapter is with the banner general of the Shanshan. They're somewhere else. They've traveled to another location where basically the Forkroot stock of that the Shanshan have is located. Basically, that's where they're at. They're here on business. They're using that note that Perrin has from Suroth that says that whoever bears this note is allowed basically anything that they want on Suroth's orders. So they're using that note to basically request for some rake-in and some flyers to be able to control those to help with the assault on the Shido. And then also, of course, the main thing of the chapter was agreeing to get all of the Forkroot that is basically at this particular location, which is something that the people guarding the place is just like, I don't know about that. That's it seems a little bit strange. But then Perrin kind of just comes up, maybe with a little bit of the Tafarin thing going on, but basically says that, oh yeah, Suroth threatened that anybody who resists this direct order is not going to like it, like they might be killed for it or something like that. I can't remember if he said if it was something that aggressive, but that was basically the gist of what went on. So Perrin and the banner general that he is temporarily allied with here have some of their supplies. They don't have as many rake-in and flyers as they wanted, but they got some of those, and they have a pretty decent supply of Forkroot that Perrin is planning to use on the Shido Aiel encampment. Also, a couple things worth noting that happened within the chapter that weren't directly related to that, like plot side of things. A random clerk who appears in the chapter starts to convulse and spews up a whole lot of beetles, which is pretty gross and disconcerting to everybody, but Perrin reveals that this type of beetle is pretty harmless, so they think it's just like I guess a pocket of evil or whatever is probably the reason why something like this happened. And then at the end of the chapter as well, you have a pretty shocking turn of events. Something that I didn't see coming was an assassination attempt made on Perrin that would have succeeded if not for him turning in his saddle to address the banner general with something strange that he had said. And it turns out that the perpetrators of this assassination attempt have poisoned themselves before they could be captured, which to them indicates that probably the person who put out for Perrin's assassination is somebody pretty powerful, because the people who failed in the assassination attempt wouldn't have wanted to be, reporting that they failed in the attempt. So that's the basic gist of chapter 12. Still not sure where we're going to go with that storyline. I would just like for the storyline to be complete and for all of this stuff chasing down Zareen and getting her back and freeing all the other prisoners and this Shido Aiel encampment. I would like for all that to be dealt with by the end of this book, so fingers crossed that happens. I kind of doubt it at this point, but that would be great, because I'm kind of just growing weary with it at this point, even though I'm liking these Perrin chapters pretty decently overall. It's too much, and the storyline has already lasted for 15 years at this point, so we need to get a move on here. Speaking of getting a move on, let's go to chapters 14 through 17, which are the Elaine chapters that we're going to cover for the week. Like I said, there's still not even really a whole ton to talk about directly here. You have a little bit of forward momentum within the plot line, of course, of Elaine trying to get the Lion Throne here in Caemlyn, and also having to defend against some of the other houses, trying to recruit some of the other houses in support of her to make that, general political foothold, and all the details associated with that. So we have a little bit of a step forward here, but mostly in the sense, not necessarily in the political sense, but more in a battle type of sense, because Aramilla, Elaine's primary contender at this point in time, has started to launch assaults on Caemlyn. These are pretty small assaults upon the walls of Caemlyn. Nothing super substantial. They're what Elaine is able to kind of combat by using some of the kin to basically take some soldiers to different points where attacks occur to head off the assaults made by Aramilla. But even so, Elaine doesn't have enough arms to really stop a full-on assault if something like that could be coming. Chapter 13 basically just sees Elaine observing one of these defenses against an assault from Aramilla's armies going on. Like that's the gist of what Chapter 13 does, until they return to the palace in the back half of the chapter, where it turns out that one of the kin, aside from some of the kin helping to travel to take little bits of soldiers to wherever needs to be defended in Caemlyn, there are also some kin who have been kind of sent out to search for soldiers loyal to Tracken House, to Elaine, to try to recruit them. And upon returning to the palace in Chapter 13, there is a guy named Gaibon who has about 10,000 soldiers to be recruited for Elaine. So that seems like good news. Chapter 14 sees Elaine and co returning to her apartments, plus receiving a good bit of information from different people. Rianne Coralie tells Elaine that one of the Soldam admits to seeing magic weaves now, so some of the Shan folk that are in the palace, the Soldam, are now kind of starting to break and admit that they're able to see magic weaves. And there's a little bit of discussion around this, trying to decide what they're going to do. This particular Soldam demands to be chained up as Damane because, it's shameful for a woman to be able to channel. They're supposed to be made into these slaves in the Shanshan culture. So there's a little bit of that going on, but I guess the idea is thrown out in the chapter to return this particular Soldam who admits to seeing weaves to the Shanshan as kind of a way to basically prove to the Shanshan that Soldam are just straight up capable of channeling, to continue upon that attempted upheaval of the Shanshan culture, because to prove that Soldam could channel would definitely be an upheaval of Shanshan culture. There's also a little bit of information given to Elaine by Renee Harfor, basically just saying that there are mercenary captains who are waiting to meet with her. There are also a couple sea folk who come to talk to Elaine, basically demanding for their apprentice, I forget the apprentice's name, who left the palace with Marilil, one of the other Aes Sedai. I think that happened in the last book. I don't remember. I'm pretty sure it was in the last book. It had to have been relatively recently, but that did happen, and the Sea Folk are demanding that there be better searches being put in place to try to locate their missing apprentice. So more political stuff going on. All the while, Elaine also worries a good bit about the fact that one of the Aes Sedai in the palace basically has to be of the Black Aja, and she just has no idea who it is, and no matter who it is somebody that she seems to like a little bit, and so she's worried about that in particular. Chapter 15 sees a little bit more interaction directly between Aviendha and Elaine before Aviendha is swept away, because apparently Rand has called orders for the Aiel and Caemlyn to go somewhere else. So Aviendha at the end of the chapter actually ends up getting taken away from Caemlyn. But in the meantime, the majority of Chapter 15 is about Aviendha basically studying, observing, just I forget the proper term. There's a word on the tip of my tongue and I can't find it. But Aviendha just kind of studying a bunch of ter'angreal and seeming to have a talent, a skill for just being able to tell what that ter'angreal is, or is at least probably used for to some degree, what it is capable of being used for. She does this with like a particular dagger that she holds, that she believes could hide its wielder from the Shadow's notice a little bit. And, she kind of wants for Elaine to be able to have it to kind of guard her from the Shadow to that degree. And at the end of the chapter, she actually gives it to her before she is taken away. Elaine also takes her to a ter'angreal stash that prior to getting pregnant, prior to having difficulties being able to use the source, because, wielding it is a little bit slippery when you're pregnant, apparently. Elaine takes Avienda to the ter'angreal stash that she had previously been studying and trying to discover how some of these things work, and has Avienda basically tell her what like a lot of these could potentially be used for. And it seems like she has a pretty solid sense of what all this is doing. So that is definitely something that I'm looking forward to seeing what could be utilized of this particular skill in the future, because that's actually a pretty big moment to reveal that, like, oh yeah, Avienda could just tell what a ter'angreal could be used for. That's cool. Wonder what's going to happen there. But of course, she does get swept away. The Aiel do get swept away from Caemlyn on Rand's orders, apparently. So that happens. And then the next couple chapters are basically just a couple of more political meetings, just Elaine learning a little bit more of what's going on with Caemlyn, and more particularly with what is going to be happening in the near immediate future. In chapter 16, it basically starts with a pretty large meeting. There's several people in there, including Mellar, who of course is the head of Elaine's guards. Elaine is not particularly enthused with this character anymore, and is pretty suspicious of him. There's definitely been searches going on to see if anybody can tell like where it is that he goes whenever he goes like into the city at night, like what it is, what is it exactly that's going on with this character, because there's some suspicious stuff going on with him. He's dismissed from this meeting early on. That is something important to note. And we also get to see, I believe it's at the end of this chapter. Let's see. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's basically the rest of the chapter, we'll just say. The mercenary captains, we'll get there in just a second. We'll wrap around to that topic in just a few moments. Part of the meeting as well is just Elaine being confronted by some of the mercenary captains that are making up part of her quote-unquote guards here in Caemlyn for the moment, who have been requesting like additional funds to kind of try to replace some of the men that have been lost in the various skirmishes that have occurred, which Elaine denies and sends them away. Renee Harfor also reports that Aramella apparently plans to take the city in a matter of days, probably, so there might be a big ol' siege upon Caemlyn happening pretty imminently, which is pretty concerning news. And of course, Nori, the other advisor of Elaine, has also found, and this is reverting back to that topic we were on just a moment ago, Nori seems to have found an old cut purse to potentially try to follow and report on Mellar without getting killed in the process, because we did have a scene that we discussed. Maybe it was in the prologue in this book, maybe it was at some point in the last book, I forget off the top of my head, but there was a scene that we got that was Mellar being followed by people in the city and him basically killing them to keep them from being able to follow him where he was going. That might have been in this prologue. Again, I just don't remember. But we know that people are trying to figure out where it is that he's going, and people who are being sent to follow him are being killed for it. And except that there's no like actual direct evidence that that's what's happening, so they can't just put him to the question without having evidence that he has committed crimes. So what they're trying to do with this old cut purse that Nori has found is have somebody who is a very successful thief, so somebody who can sneak around and whatnot, to try to follow Mellar and report on him without getting killed in the process. Like I said, Elaine weaves a particular type of I forget what the particular term that they used was, but weaves a little bit of magic on the man's clothing that kind of acts similar to like a warder bond, but like on the clothes specifically, that will be able to tell her where the man goes, and she makes that threat to him basically that she'll know where it is that he goes, and if he's not doing his task. So now they have somebody to follow Mellar, and given that he's just left the vicinity pretty unhappy because of being dismissed the way that he was by Elaine, it's maybe safe to assume that we're going to have a scene fairly soon from one of those two POVs that we'll see a little bit of stuff going on there, maybe a little bit later in the book, I don't know. Robert Jordan's POV allocation can be a little bit weird sometimes, but that is the big thing of chapter 16, and chapter 17 sees more political meetings of this kind of thing going on, where Elaine at the start of the chapter is going to try to meet with Dylan about some of the other houses, because of course, you know, we talked a little bit earlier in this video about Elaine needing some more house support to be able to make the political case for a house Trackend taking the throne of Camelin. And Dylan has been going out to talk with some of the other people, and so Elaine is trying to go to meet with her when she encounters some uneasy nobles in the palace, who are uneasy because they've noticed that the palace has been shifting a little bit. There's some funky liminal space stuff going on with the palace in Camelin, and this was something that even Elaine noticed a few chapters back as well, actually, that she had gotten lost in this own palace that she had grown up in. She had maybe blamed it on being a ditz because of being pregnant, like there's too much on her mind or something like that. But it turns out that there's a lot of people experiencing this, including Birgitta, who I guess has like an infallible memory with regard to like locations where she's been and stuff. And even she has noticed that the palace is different. So like, I guess that's evidence that the palace is different. So something is weird going on here. Not entirely sure what, but there is definitely something weird going on here. Elaine also asks about, at some point in the chapter, about the status of Bashir's army in light of, you know, Aramilla's possible upcoming assault, which we learned from Aramilla POV at the end of the chapter, where basically the only information that I really need to go into in that POV is that the assault is going to be a week from tomorrow, quote unquote, is what that POV says. So again, a pretty imminent attack that's going to be happening on Camelin. And then also the fact that Rand has called the Aiel to go somewhere, and Elaine is a little bit concerned that perhaps Bashir's army is maybe been called by Rand to go somewhere as well, maybe. It is noted that there are about 200,000 Borderlanders still kind of out and about Camelin, and that's causing some questions with regard to like, why are they here and why haven't they launched an assault themselves? Like, what's going on? Why would Aramilla launch her own assault on Camelin when the Borderlanders are there? Like, what's the actual strategy going on there? And we also know that there are about 60,000 other people from house armies, whom Dylan reports, again, going back to that note, that have opted to stay neutral. So there are a few houses that are kind of out and about and have 60,000 men, but just have not chosen to support any other given house in this political game here, unfortunately for Elaine. And Elaine is also later informed in the chapter in very concerning fashion, we shall say, that various of the missing kin, because there have been kin that have gone missing over the past few weeks, I guess, and up to this point, the assumption has been that they've been running away. It turns out that maybe they're probably not running away and that they've instead been being killed, because it is reported to Elaine that Rianne Corley, of all people, has been smothered by the power, has been murdered in the palace, and there has also been at least one other personal item from another kin, another thought runaway kin who would not have left that personal item in the palace. If she had run away, she would have taken it with her. So we kind of have to come to the assumption that these people have been killed and disposed of in the palace in other ways, and that Rianne Corley was done a little bit more, you know, I guess in your face, to make it more obvious that, like, hey, there's somebody infiltrated in your palace. Is kind of like, I guess, a pride maneuver or something like that. So definitely concerning stuff going on within the palace. But that is everything from this diary. This video is really short. This is easily the shortest diary I've done probably since before Lord of Chaos. So that's cool. That's everything that I have covered in this week's worth of reading. It was decent, you know, there's a couple big reveals in there, or a couple decent size reveals, decent importance reveals, kind of like what I was saying before, but still not like a whole ton of active forward progression in the way that I would most like, I guess we shall say, but I am looking forward to continuing. I do have the entire back half of the book to go, and yeah, we'll see how this goes. At this point, I'm not entirely sure where it is that I'm following with Knife of Dreams right now, but again, I still have an entire half of the book to go. I haven't gotten into any of the Rand POV stuff, although the next chapter that I'm going to read is Rand POV, so I'm hoping for the back half of this book to pick things up a little bit and kind of I guess, surge the pace forward a little bit more, a little bit better. That's what I'm hoping for. We shall see what happens. But, talking a little bit about seeing what happens with the book, I suppose I'll take just a moment here at the very end of this video to talk about when the rest of the diaries for Knife of Dreams are going to come out. I normally do these reading diary videos on Thursdays. This video is coming out a couple days late because of that trip that I had to take a couple days to recover from and didn't do any reading during anyway. And so I still have half of the book to go. When am I going to do the diaries for that? Will I have a diary for this next Thursday? Probably not, because I'm going to do a different type of video for Thanksgiving. So it's not going to be one of these reading diaries, so don't expect episode 4 of the Knife of Dreams reading diaries to come out on Thursday. Instead, what I'm actually planning to do is also spend 3 more diaries talking about Knife of Dreams the way that I've had 3 for the first half. I intend to split the back half of the book into about 3 more diaries to talk about the rest of it, and those I plan to come out on December 4th, 11th, and 18th. So those 3 Thursdays, and then that will leave me the ability to make a, kind of different video for Christmas on that Thursday as well, just to be a little bit different. So yeah, I think the next 3 diaries, the other 3 diaries for this book, covering the rest of this book, will occur over those first few weeks of December. And part of the other reason for deciding that is because I'm going to be doing another trip actually for the entire second week of December, and I'm also going to be working Christopher Rocchio's booth at Dragonsteel Nexus over the last few, basically the whole back half of the first week of December, and because of some of that stuff going on, I need to have video content, and deciding to do diaries for those few weeks and just being able to finish this book hopefully within the next week and a half or so, making those 3 diaries so that I don't have to worry about whatever other video content I need to do for the first half of December, I think is going to work out a little bit more in my favor from a creation standpoint. So that's the plan. So don't expect another one of these diaries for nearly 2 weeks, I guess. December 4th is when the next part will come out. I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to be covering in that diary, like how much of the book, which chapters specifically. That is stuff that I will determine here shortly, probably once I have this video edited and uploaded, because I'm on a relative time crunch with this one. After all of that is done, I will go ahead and decide what it is, where it is that I'm going to make those splits, and yeah, so that's that. Thank you for watching this diary. If you did, I really appreciate it. I'll be back in a couple of weeks for the next one. For now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys there.